Welcome to the WanderLearn Show. I'm your host, Francis Tapon. In this episode, I have Matt Halteman, who is the author of Hungry, Beautiful Animals. It's a book that talks about the joyful care for, and the case basically for going vegan. Now, don't run away yet, because most people, when they hear the word vegan, they're like, oh my God, I'm turning this off right away.
Get me out of here.
Exactly. And that's the whole point of your book, Matt, which is basically how can we approach the concept or the conversation of vegan and not make it a four-letter word that like makes people want to run away. And I'm just going to quote one part of the book. Quote, "No matter who you are, you're amazing in some ways, messed up in others, and a middling case overall. In our honest moments, we know this about ourselves. It's a mixed bag, baby. That's just the way it is." Tell us why did you write that sentence, those sentences?
Yeah. So my experience of being human is that it's complicated, right? So each and every one of us is an inner family or more inside, right? So we're physical bodies, we have social relationships, there's emotional things going on, there's these intellectual possibilities, and then the moral point of view to kind of abstract from it all. And if you're like me, Francis, those different parts of you aren't always in perfect alignment, right? Have you experienced this, right? Your gut wants a burger, your heart wants to, nuzzle a cow, and your head is sort of bobbling back and forth between defending your old habits and trying some new ones. So what motivated me to write those words was just the desire to take the weight of the world off our shoulders when it comes to this set of practices, right? I think we're so used to thinking of going vegan in terms of this rigid, shaming, blaming, obligation focused paradigm, right? So like you said, we hear the word and we run like roaches from a tactical flashlight, right? This is the last thing we want to hear. If you hear the buffet at the party is vegan, you're going to skip that stop, right? That's just kind of how it goes. And so I wanted to try to make a case for going vegan by articulating a beautiful vision of a vegan world that would run on desire rather than shame, right? Because middling cases like us, we don't have any problem hanging out on the beach with our best friend or taking a second bite of tiramisu or lingering in front of a Rembrandt, right? At the Rijksmuseum, right? I mean, when desire is on the job, we want to do this. It takes no effort at all. And so I thought, well, what if we could get desire working for us when it comes to going vegan? What if we came to see a vegan world as something that we all want and came to see the steps that we take as middling individuals who know in advance we'll never be perfect, take the weight of the world off our shoulders right from the get-go, kick perfectionism to the curb and say, how do I move in the general direction of this beautiful thing we all want?
Right.
That was the hope.
That's great. And it kind of reminds me to a certain extent of environmentalism and people who are environmentalists about whether you recycle or do you walk or you take a bike. Are you trying to lower your CO2 footprint? Are you going like Greta Thunberg and taking the boat across the Atlantic Ocean instead of a plane? And sometimes people who are hardcore environmentalists and climate people who are afraid of climate change and really concerned about it, they wag their finger at you and make you feel like you're always a failure. And like you say, we're middling. We're kind of like, we're kind of good. We're not horrible. We're kind of, and just to like, we do our best to kind of not have not live a lavish lifestyle and have, 7 cars and do all this stuff. But we're not great either. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we just need to like, be okay. It doesn't that kind of like it solves the marketing problem. And I think to me, vegan, and that kind of like what hit me over the head with your excellent book is that veganism has a marketing problem. Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I think yes and no. I think it's more than a marketing problem because marketing is about getting you to close the short-term sale. Right. I think the vegan piece is a marketing problem for sure, because we hear the word and we're not interested. Right. But beyond the marketing, even if we buy it once, right, in Veganuary for a month, or if we see that new product and we're like, ooh, this tastes just like a real burger, I'm in. there remains the challenge of like sustaining this. And I think anytime it comes to a human problem of sustaining something, it's a spiritual problem in the broadest sense. Now, stick with me. I'm not talking about a religious problem, right? When I say spiritual here, I mean it in the sense of like the Stoic philosophers, that there's this really complex system inside us and it's pulling us in every which way. And unless we learn to live in the present, right, and really enjoy the moment and stay off, right, that seesaw of anxiety that makes us afraid of the future and regret that makes us lament the past, right? Unless we can live in that present moment, which is where joy, right, it can reach us, it's really hard to sustain anything. And so I think, yes, there's a marketing problem. Getting people to listen to, right, the beauty that awaits them in that alternative burger or in that, alternative leather or whatever it is, that, right, is stage one. But then even if we capture a person's imagination for that initial sale, right, moving them into a space where this becomes an abiding source of existential joy is a separate problem, right? So what I'm hoping to do here is really solve two problems. I want to get the marketing problem solved, but I also want to give people an opportunity to get this more deeply rooted in really fertile existential soil. So it's not just, okay, the Beyond Burgers now have been frozen for 3 years in the trunk freezer, never to be seen again, right? We were initially excited, but then just couldn't find a way to grow anything, right, in that soil. So I guess marketing plus sustainability. Let's first get people excited, but then let's help people to turn this into a long-term joy, right, in the way they live.
So one of the ways that you're thinking about getting it excited is to turn the whole argument of sacrifice and deprivation, which is what veganism kind of stands for most people. Like, oh my God, I got to give up all these things. It's, deprive myself, and then reframe it as abundance and joy. Can you tell me, that sounds great and abstract, but how does this work on a practical level? If somebody's listening to this and they're like, I want to have my hamburger right now or my chicken, how do you make things like fun in veganism?
Yeah,
Fun veganism sounds like an oxymoron.
It does. That's one of the reasons, Francis, that I eschew the term veganism, right? I really do not love isms of any kind, right? I certainly don't love vegan is anything that is stringent, restrictive, perfectionistic,
dogmatic,
fundamentalist, dogmatic, right? Human beings, because, you started in just the right place, Francis. We are a middling bunch, right? And so anything with an ism on the end that's going to tempt us to think that the way to have success is to do it all at one go, right, is going to be a recipe, I think, for failure. So when I'm trying to convey the beauty of vegan living, I take two steps, right? Okay. The first thing I do is to say, going vegan is an aspiration. This is not an identity, right? I think most people think of vegan as, well, I get this identity. It's like a badge that I wear. If I never, ever do anything terrible ever again, leather belt, my vegan patch is ripped, right, from my jean jacket. It's an identity that you get or fail to have based on, what you do at any given moment. I think that's a huge mistake. I think the better way to think about going vegan is the way that we think about literally every other human aspiration.
Like
right?
being a good Christian. I mean, you're
exactly.
not a perfect Christian, right?
100%. I mean, anybody who thinks that when they claim Christianity, that they're saying, well, I am the perfect instantiation of the teachings of Jesus Christ.
I never sin. I never sin.
Exactly. I mean, this is absurd. And in the same way, think of how ridiculous it would be, to wait outside a Buddhist gathering, notice that someone got a little angry when they saw a bird took a dump on their car, and then we're like, oh, guess you're not a Buddhist. You're too attached to material things. I mean, this is not how aspiration works. So my first step is to say, hey, look, what it means to go vegan is to have your imagination captured by the vision of an absolutely beautiful world. By the way, it's the world that you found beautiful since you were in kindergarten. You don't need any beliefs, any feelings, any values. that you didn't already have the first time through Charlotte's Web, right? Like this is the world you want to live in, the
Hold
world
on.
where, yeah, yeah.
Develop that idea, because you've mentioned a couple times in your book the whole about, this is something, these kindergarten values.
Right, right.
It's been a while since I was in kindergarten, probably at least 3 weeks. So remind me, for those who've been away from kindergarten for a while, what are these values and why do we forget them?
Yeah, yeah. So think about when you go to kindergarten, right? Kindergarten is no place for moral perfectionism, right? If you want to have a community where people are showing up, doing well, working together, creating a safe space to learn and grow, there's some really basic values that you need to have, right? You need to be committed to things like fairness. Hey, it's the green table's turn to use the glitter markers, right? You need to be committed to things like compassion. If someone falls and skins their knee, you help them. You don't stand there and laugh at their misfortune. When somebody asks you, if you're trying to be fair, it helps to be honest, right? Because you can't give people what they deserve if you're not honest about the circumstances. Authenticity, right? Show up and do what you say you're going to do, right? If the teacher asks you to clean up the Legos and you say you will, you don't just want to leave them sitting there. These are all things. Yeah,
But
yeah.
hold on. So why aren't kindergartners vegans if they do all the other things so well?
That's a great question. And I think that has to do, right, with that very first step I was talking about, because we see vegan as an identity. Never ever eat another animal product ever again, ever. Right? So instead of seeing vegan as an aspiration, let's move in the direction of a world where creaturely flourishing is available to everyone who can have it. Right? And I think most kindergartners are in fact going vegan, right? If they see a bird dying in the middle of the playground, they're going to run and get Mrs. Stark, and they're going to get a little box, and they're going to get a little paper towel with some water, and that, right? I mean, and that's what I have in mind, right? You don't have to know you're going vegan in order to be existentially oriented toward the desire to see creaturely flourishing win, if that makes sense.
One of the challenges, Matt, I think, with the whole animal rights movement is that we've abstracted away, and the animal production is just genius at doing this. I even had a Buddhist teacher when I was in college who told me that she looked at a slab of meat, it just doesn't look like a cow. Chicken doesn't, it comes in a square things. Everything is so abstract. And so we don't associate these were actual living, breathing animals. And somehow we get very offended if somebody eats a dog or a cat, but have a big problem and no problem if it's a chicken or a pig, which, is just as cognizant and emotional and as charming as a dog or a cat.
Absolutely. And that, that hooks into the second piece, right? Because the first piece is, hey, let's take the world off your shoulders. Let's see this as a beautiful vision. Let's kick perfectionism to the curb from minute one. What does living into this world look like? The second piece is what I call the joy aggregator piece, right? The second piece is where, as you take steps toward going vegan, what happens to you slowly but surely is all those weird things like you just pointed out. I love dogs. I need them snoring at my feet in order to get 8 hours of sleep. But, right, Wilbur the pig, unless I'm reading about him in the book by E.B. White, is going to be bacon on my BLT, right? That is weird, right? And that's why kindergartners, when they get asked, I don't know if you've ever seen the YouTube video. This is actually earlier, but like a 3-year-old boy is given octopus to eat. And he has this amazing conversation with his mother where he basically says, octopus, why would I want to eat octopus? I want the octopus to be alive, right? And I think we get trained out of that. So what the joy aggregation step is, as we move toward this, we start to see, in the same way that I'm delighted to have Gus living in my home with me, right, contributing to my flourishing on a daily basis, giving me that foot massage. Oh, well, maybe that's too much information. Joining me at the dinner table, let's say, right, to avoid the TMI. What about a world where pigs and chickens and cows and turkeys would receive the same emotional it would elicit the same emotional response from us. Over time, it feels really, really good to kick that cognitive dissonance to the curb, to become more emotionally coherent, to have our social practices line up with our intellectual commitments. And what I say, right, about the joy aggregating power of going vegan is that it's equally potent for harmonizing our inner parts, right? Bringing our physical bodies, our social relationships, our ethical and moral concerns, our intellectual concerns into harmony, as it is for making the world a more beautiful place for workers, a more climate stable place, a place where our food systems are not suffering from food apartheid, where the highest processed foods are available in the neighborhoods that are already struggling, right, with various forms of disease. So whether you're looking at the effects internally or the effects externally, our desire tells the story. We want to be more inwardly fulfilled and harmonized. And we want to live in a world that is more just, more beautiful, more fair, right? More in keeping with the findings of science. And that's just what going vegan does over time, right? It transforms who we are on the inside and sends us out into the world with joy to make the world a better place. So it's a joy aggregator.
I'm going to quote one more part of your book, and I want you to kind of elaborate it because it's an interesting, complex sentence that some people may not get, but I want you to unpack it. Mm-hmm. In going vegan, I'm quoting you, each of us will negotiate our fragility and flow as we go, and there's no reason to give up the aspiration simply because we can't live as fully into it as we'd like to right away, or ever for that matter.
Nice.
Explain.
Yeah, so fragility and flow. Remember when we started this podcast, we talked about the fact that we're middling cases, right? So we're very fragile. There are some things we're not very good at. There are some things that really hurt our feelings. There are some things that make it hard to make any progress. We've all had those days. We get up in the morning, hard to get out of bed, hard to face the things we're doing. We're fragile. We're vulnerable to harm, and we're vulnerable to death. But we also all have these things that make our hearts sing. And Francis, from listening to your stuff, from seeing you out there in the world, travel, right? Being on that Vietnamese bus and doing that 360-degree view and just having your heart sing in this place of adventure and beauty. We all have these things that when we're doing them, we completely lose time. When we're doing them, all those different parts of who we are on the inside that are usually fighting each other or making it hard to feel good about ourselves are just for whatever reason in perfect alignment. For some people, that's skiing. For some people, that's reading novels. For some people, that's travel or learning a new language or taking an amazing course in science or learning about AI. I mean, we all have different things that make our heart sing. And I just basically port that idea into the process of going vegan, right? So each and every one of us is going to be good at some of the challenges associated with going vegan and terrible, right, at some of the others. And so what I'm saying when I say negotiate fragility and flow, we want to take that ancient Socratic advice to start by knowing ourselves. Right? The first thing you do, right, when you're looking for that low-hanging fruit going vegan is to do that SWOT analysis, right? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are the opportunities here? What are the threats to my failing at this? And then you tack toward the strengths, right? You find the things that make your heart sing, that move you in the direction of that flow. And maybe for some people, that's not going to be changing their diet. Maybe it's going to be visiting farm sanctuaries or adopting a companion animal, right? Or reading a book or watching a documentary. I'm all for long inner soil amendments before anybody changes the way they eat, right? Sometimes really for these things to take hold, you've got to know where the flow is, so that when the fragility pops up, you don't just quit right away. And so what I try to do is in this book is to help people brainstorm before they even start. What do they love? right? And going vegan, because it's everything, right? It affects everything from the soil to the stratosphere. There's gonna be something you love, right? There is gonna be a place to plug in here that makes your heart sing. And so start there, and then, right, get some little victories there. And when the fragility rears its ugly head, you laugh at it, right? You forgive yourself for it. You say, yep, here it is, vulnerable humankind. We all know how that works. And you laugh it off. And I find, right, I'm with Nietzsche on this. If you can laugh at it, right, you can love it, right? If you're really, really on edge and perfectionistic, and right, if you can't laugh at it, this is one of the reasons I love stand-up comedy, right? It helps us to love everything by seeing it in its fragility and vulnerability and embracing it anyway, right? And so that's what I have in mind.
What would you tell to somebody who's a pescatarian who says, you know what, I feel a lot of compassion for these animals that walk around, but fish, come on, what does a fish care if you hit it over the head? So what would you tell them?
Well, so the first thing I'd tell them is to read my friend and writing mentor Jonathan Balcom's book, What a Fish Knows, because I'll tell you, the inner world of our fishy friends is dazzling. And what cognitive ethologists are finding out about fish life these days is spectacularly interesting.
Sorry, but to interrupt, but there's incredible compassion for certain fishes, like I guess it's not a fish, it's a dolphin. They're mammals, I suppose, but but it's fascinating to me how we have such compassion. It seems so arbitrary. If I was like an alien, I'm like, okay, dolphin's good, trout is fair game. Dog is bad, don't eat it. Chicken, okay. It's like, it seems so arbitrary. It's like, it's amazing. Anyway, sorry, continue.
No, that's beautiful. And I think that's a really important piece of this. There's no such thing as one size fits all, Francis, right? Because I would say it's not so much arbitrary as it is contingent, right? There's a really big difference between arbitrariness, I think, and contingency. Arbitrary as well, who knows why that is? It's just random. Contingent is linked to very particular and specific circumstances in very particular and specific places. And there are fascinating genealogies and provenances and histories that go into every little contingency. And so I think when we really study ourselves, and this is something I try to do right in chapter 2 of the book, where I delve into how our own personal identity, the contingency of the fact that, food is something for most of us. We use it to express gender identity. We use it to express ethnicity. We use it to express, but the ways in which we do that differ a lot from culture to culture, right? So I think when we have, excitement about dolphins and no compassion at all for salmon, well, that's probably because our culture has held up dolphins as fascinating or dignified or whatever in some way, and they've held up trout as lunch or something you have. And so I think those contingencies and discovering those contingencies and seeing them for what they are, Francis, that has been actually for me one of the most, as a philosopher, one of the most exciting features of going vegan, right? Because for curious minded people who love adventure, and I would guess that your audience, right, is going to be people who love a good adventure, who love to be dazzled by something new, right? Who love to see things that they've never seen before and try to internalize, right, the inner ripples that those experiences cause. And I think going vegan for me has just been one fascinating development after the next, right? And that pescatarian question is one I love because, in the book, I think it's chapter 3 where I talk about kindergarten ethics, I start by talking about poking at this fish, right, that I'm in Kona, and this is fresh caught, right? And I'm sitting there really for the first time thinking, man, I'll bet this guy was out there living the life. And now here I am sticking a fork in it. And, for somebody who has the courage and the desire to learn new things, man, this blew my doors off. It led to a fascinating spelunking session, inside. And if you like adventure outside, I mean, the inside adventures associated with going vegan, I think, can be just as just as compelling, right? You see all these inner vistas, that you haven't seen before when you come to see these creatures and their interconnectedness in brand new ways.
We're going to take a quick pause, and we're going to come back in the next part. And I want to ask you about cultured meat.
Great.